2 years into marriage, Jake found himself enslaved to a sexual addiction. He wanted to break free, but he felt so stuck. And as a result, he just continued to live a double life, hiding his unwanted behavior from his wife. But that all changed one day when it kind of randomly came to life. And at that moment, he thought his marriage was over. And so in this episode, he shares about what happened next and much more. We talk about how shame truly crushed him, but it didn't destroy him. He answers the question, like, what kept your marriage from falling apart? We also discuss how pride is often at the root of lust or sexual compulsions. He touches on how a wound of abandonment from his family was at the root of a lot of his behavior. And he shares 6 tips to break free from sexual compulsion or addiction. So if you or someone you know struggles with a sexual compulsion or addiction, especially within marriage, this episode is for you. Stay with us. Welcome to the Restored Podcast, helping you heal and grow from the trauma of your parents' divorce, separation, or broken marriage so you can break the cycle. I'm your host, Joey Panarelli. This is episode 120. We're so thrilled that so many of you have found the podcast helpful and even healing. We've heard tons of great feedback. One listener said this: finally, a podcast that helps me understand why my parents' divorce when I was 5 affected me so much. Joey's guests are articulate, and every episode helps me heal. I normally avoid religious content, but this show is so focused on felt experience that it doesn't come across religious at all. Major props for that. Thank you. And I just want to say, you're so welcome. Like we do it for you. Like I know it might sound kind of cheesy, but we do it for you. We're so happy that the show has been helpful and even healing. Today's episode is sponsored by Dakota Lane Fitness. If you've ever felt intimidated by working out and eating healthy, or perhaps you've tried workout programs and meal plans that just didn't work for you, then this is especially for you. Dakota Lane is a nationally certified fitness and nutrition coach who's helped about 1,000 clients worldwide, including moms of 10 kids, CEOs, MLB baseball players, 75-year-olds, and people who've never even stepped foot in a gym. Dakota builds customized fitness and nutrition plans with around-the-clock accountability and one-on-one coaching for people anywhere in the world in a safe and approachable environment. But what makes Dakota different than the insane amount of fitness and nutrition coaches out there? I would say 3 things. 1, he's done it himself. He's a very healthy, ripped dude, but he's also a good, virtuous man. He's not just caught up in his looks. Another thing I'd say is he studied to become a priest for a little while, and from that experience and his time at Franciscan University and the Augustine Institute, he developed this belief that to live a fully human life involves not just growing in one area, such as your spiritual life, and neglecting all the rest, like your body. We really need to care for it all so we can become more virtuous and free to love. And the final thing is, Dakota's mission is not just to help you, get a 6-pack or get bigger arms or whatever. He really wants to lead people to experience the highest quality of life through intentional discipline and treating their bodies the way that they were made to be treated. And so if you would desire that freedom, if you desire transforming your body and even your life, Dakota can help you. One client said this: Dakota Lane changed my life. And the best part is that what I once thought was impossible was made so doable and realistic by Dakota. This program is worth every penny. If you have struggled in the past and can't seem to find a way to change yourself for the better, look no further. Dakota Lane is your man. And so if you want to see what Dakota offers and the amazing results that his clients have achieved, just go to dakotalanefitness.com or click on the link in the show notes. My guest today is Jake Kim. Jake is a Catholic leader with over 20 years of experience in various ministry settings. He has a master's degree in counseling psychology and a Bachelor of Arts in theology with a concentration in catechetics. Jake has worked in adult faith formation, seminary and in priestly formation, diocesan evangelization, catechesis, retreat ministry, and had a private counseling practice for over 15 years. Currently, Jake offers human and pastoral formation for Catholic leaders, is a consultant to various churches and ministries across North America. He offers an annual men's retreat in British Columbia, Canada, and accompanies male leaders on their journey of faith. And he co-hosts 2 podcasts. Restore the Glory is one of them, and the other one is Way of the Heart. Plus, in this episode, he shares about a new podcast that he and his wife are going to be launching. And with 2 children at university, Jake currently lives in Abbotsford, BC, British Columbia, up in Canada, with his wife, Heather, and one of their 3 children. Now, in this episode, we do talk about God and faith. If you don't believe in God, you're totally welcome here. Anyone listening to this show for a while knows that this is not a strictly religious podcast. And so wherever you're at, I'm glad you're here. My challenge to you is this. Just listen with an open mind. Even if you were to take out or skip the God part, you're still going to benefit so much from this episode. A little bit of a trigger warning before we jump in. This obviously is a mature topic talking about sexual compulsions and addictions. And so we recommend putting in earphones or at least not listening around children. But with that, here's my conversation with Jake. Jake, so good to have you on the show. I'm honored that you joined us.
Thanks so much for having me, Joey. It's great to be with you.
I want to get into your story. And if you would, I'd love to start with a little bit of background and then take us to that day when you and your wife, Heather, had that really difficult conversation about your struggle with lust. What happened?
Well, the backstory is that I walked into marriage under a lot of deception. I had convinced Heather that previous issues in my life weren't there anymore. And she was convinced and settled, and she had entered into marriage, with a lot of bliss and isn't this great? And, and all that you would hope and expect. But what she didn't realize is that I was hiding a lot. There was a complete double life that was going on for me. And I think to make it even worse, at least it feels worse to me, is that when all of this was happening, I was working at a church. And so I was leading people into the Catholic faith through RCIA. So the duplicity stung particularly because my double life was extra heightened because I was proclaiming something about not living a double life to people. So I'm working at a parish and all this is going on behind the scenes. And it's not like I'm loving it or embracing it all and going, oh, who cares? So I never was content with this being the reality, but felt utterly defeated and honestly didn't have much hope. Confession was my close friend, and that's kind of the best that I was doing. So the day where everything hit the fan, we were getting ready, or we were up in our bedroom and we were just chatting about various things in life. And it's really ironic because in hindsight, I realized what happened is that I was actually sharing a story which was very boastful. It was a story almost patting myself on the back about how wonderful of a helper I was to people. And so I was sharing with Heather about this story, about this guy who came to me for counsel about going to confession for sins of impurity. And so I was sharing with Heather, and I counseled him so well. And I said, I said to him, you got to go see Father so-and-so. He's really good at these things, but Father so-and-so, he's not so good. And boy, look at this great counsel I gave, and was very full of myself. And Heather, for some reason, it hit her. And she said, Jake, how would you know which priest would be better at that? And that question felt like everything went into slow motion. And I had possibly, the most important decision of my life right in that moment. Because there were other times where Heather had quote unquote caught me or confronted me and then I'd lied my way out of it. But for some reason, this particular day, she asked that question and I made the decision to cross a threshold that was terrifying to me and to start being honest with her. And so I think my pause and probably the look on my face began to communicate to her, oh no, we have a lot more that's going on here. And so I think if I recall correctly, it was probably over the course of 2 days that I came completely clean about everything that was going on in our marriage. And honestly, it was horrible, just to be blunt. There was not a lot of consolation in it. The consolation did come for me quicker than for Heather for obvious reasons, because the burden of a secret and an addiction is excruciating. And so when you no longer live under the burden, what often happens is the addict starts to feel a bit of relief, and that can be massively confusing and hurtful to the person you've hurt, your spouse or somebody else, because they're watching you almost feel relief and they've just been thrown into, a hornet's nest of pain. And so that came a bit later, but the first few days were terrible because I'm I'm honestly thinking my marriage is over. That's genuinely what I thought. We had my oldest daughter at the time, and it was a very real, serious consider. So much so that I went to work. Probably, I think I took the first day or two off and said I was sick or whatever. And I went back to work and I had a meeting with my boss who I was very close with. And I said, I need to talk to you and I need your help. And I said, I need to learn about annulments because I think my marriage is over. And he just obviously was floored and was like, what are you talking about? So it launched into this whole conversation with him. So that's how the first kind of day went. There's all kinds of nuances I could say, but that's the rough sketch.
Wow. No, thank you for sharing so vulnerably and knowing you a bit, how long you've come from that day. I just want to say a little bit of a pause in the conversation. Like, I admire you so much. It's incredible, the transformation in your life. And we're going to get to that. I want to give everyone some hope because I know we're in like a heavy spot right now. But man, obviously I know you'd say it's a lot of God's grace, but you have to be a fighter to be able to come back from something like that, which I'm excited to get into. One place I want to go to is leading up to that. You alluded to the fact that, all of this was unwanted. This is unwanted sexual behavior. What did it feel like in the midst of it all? I think so often it might be easy to like skip over that, how grueling and difficult it is. But I think to people who are in the midst of that right now, it's actually really helpful to talk about that. So what did it feel like in the midst of it? And then after you opened up to Heather, how did you not let the shame crush you?
I think any person that has any level of addiction, and some addictions are worse than others, like an addiction to cookies doesn't seem to bother as many people as an addiction to pornography, right? So it's like, okay, but when you kind of increase the magnitude of what you're addicted to, alcohol, any kind of pleasure, and then when you bring in sex and all of those kinds of things, I think the reason that the sexual one has greater implication, greater pain, greater sting to yourself and other people is because it taps into deep, deep dynamics in the human person, which is we're inherently relational. And especially when you're in a marriage. And an addiction of that kind in a marriage is like a direct, like heresy of sorts. It's like a direct counter sign to the very thing you're supposedly living day to day. Alcohol maybe is a little bit less than that because it doesn't have necessarily as blatant a direct correlation, but it does. I mean, like a person coming home drunk impacts their spouse. I'm not trying to diminish that at all. But, food is a bit less and a bit kind of like, for me, the sting of it gets less. And I'm sure other people who struggle in those other areas would argue the opposite, and I'm welcome them arguing that. I think that's fair for them. But when you're in the midst of it and you look at something and you feel the clutches of something around you that you honestly, sincerely believe there's no way out of, it is a horrible experience. I think it's the closest thing I've ever come to knowing what it's like to be in jail. Like, here's the reality. I can't do anything to get out of here. I am imprisoned by this. Every effort I try, it's like trying to shake the bars of a prison cell open. Doesn't work. And, you go for a week or whatever, and you even have the slightest ounce of hope that maybe this one's different. I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, it's been 2 weeks since I haven't fallen, and feeling this sense of victory, only to like the next day have fallen worse than maybe 6 months ago. And that repetitive cycle of defeat and shame and imprisonment it really can mess with you. And I think what eventually people probably do is they just dissociate because of that pain. It gets so bad, they just start to check out and they get really numb. And that's usually when the addiction gets worse, is because there's this thing in psychology called a tolerance effect, where what one beer would do now takes 5. What one website does now, it takes a worse one, a more intense one. And so you're always looking for the next high, and you get used to the current high. And so it increases, your tolerance increases. And so usually the ugliness of what you do can get worse. And so that whole cycle it's brutal, and it can create a lot of despair. I know a lot of men and women who I've seen and encountered, and they feel utterly defeated. They're like a shell of a person. It's like looking at someone in a concentration camp and they're like, I'm going to die in here and I have no hope of getting out. It's terrible. Like, it's anybody who knows it. And that's one of the things where I have a lot of compassion on people who struggle in this area, because I know what it's like. I know the pain of these areas, and I don't wish it on anybody. Your second question about the shame, it's funny. I'm not sure I didn't let it crush me, if I'm honest. I think the shame probably did crush me. The shame, even in the addiction, was crushing me. The shame of telling Heather, like, my stomach, I probably grew 15 ulcers in 4 days, and I never knew about it. I mean, it was terrible. Like, it was brutal. And I say that because I'm not trying to candy coat this. Like, there's a no BS philosophy that I kind of abide by. And I don't want anybody to have, oh, it's rainbows and flowers when you go through this thing. It's awful. Like, it's brutal, but it is incredibly worth it. So I think the shame actually did crush me. I think why it didn't destroy me is maybe how I would rephrase the question. And honestly, yeah, I would say grace. And I would say there are things in my life that God did to me very, very early on. He set up in me, He established in me that were critical to my recovery. And I think that's for everybody. I trust that that's the case for everybody. Everybody has things that God has put in their soul and in their personality and in their temperament, etc., that is their pathway out. They probably just don't realize it. And so here's an example of one of those for me is I'm a very competitive person. I've been competitive since I was little. I had 2 older brothers and I hated to lose. And so what ended up happening is that very early dynamic that just felt like me and my personality, with some of the right love and mentorship from other people, they tapped into that dynamic in me. And it was like a lifeline of don't lose. And it like brought fire, even a spark, back into a pouring rain environment internally. And that really mattered. There was one man in particular, he's quite well known. Christopher West was a dear friend of mine in this journey. And Christopher West at the time was just Christopher West. Nobody really knew who he was. He wasn't this big popular guy. He lit fires underneath me all the time. And he, I don't know if he could see it or it was just the Holy Spirit, but he could motivate me like an athlete in a locker room. You watch those YouTube things and people are like, I would run through a wall now, because like he had that capacity, and he lit things up in me that massively helped me and created lifelines for me. I think another one that was a lifeline for me, like I first learned that all of this was wrong when I was 18. I went to college, and I remember going into the church because honestly, I was lonely, and I went to university, and the girl I was after didn't work out. And now I'm like, oh crap, I'm all alone. What do I do? And it was this tug of, well, where am I going to go? Where are people going to be nice to me? I'm insecure. I'm alone. And I felt like, go to the church. They kind of have to be nice to me. So I was like, okay. So I go to the church and I meet some nice people, and they did. They welcomed me. Then I start going to the talks and stuff like that. And the priest was brilliant. He just started saying the truth. And one of the things he said is masturbation, pornography, sexual addiction is real, and it is a mortal sin. And here's what a mortal sin is. And that scared me, because he said, hell is real and you don't want to go there. And if you don't want to go there, you need to be in the state of grace. And so I had a very quick, oh no, oh, this is bad. And for some reason, the concept of eternity haunted me, like forever, like jail forever. And it terrified me. And so that in turn motivated me. And he said, there's a very simple way to be in the state of grace. Go to confession. And I was like, okay. And so at some level, I was like, I don't care. I kind of had this internal disposition of, if you don't let me go to confession, Father, somehow that's on you, because I tried, and God have mercy for you, buddy. So I worked those priests as hard as you can work them, man. Like, I went to confession a lot. Numerous times I went twice in one day. They had the Saturday morning one and the Saturday afternoon one, and I'd hit both of them because I would fall that frequently. So that was another massive motivation for me, was somebody just flat out saying, hell is real. You don't want to go there. And there's a way out. You need to be in the state of grace. And there's a sacrament you can get, even if you're an addict, you can come to. And all you need is a slightest bit of, I don't want this anymore. And the Lord takes that. He cleans it all. And I gorged on confession. That was huge for me.
It's beautiful. Wow. No, so many lessons and so many great points that I'd love to comment on. One of the lessons I'm learning from you is just how essential it is to have people in your life who can love you through this, who see you as you are, not some mask, not some fake version of you, but just like Christopher West was for you. He's been on this podcast, so people are somewhat aware of him. And man, that was just like a lifeline, like you said, something that kept you moving. And also, like, I know it was such a big struggle for your wife, Heather. I'm curious, just let's stop here for a second. Like, what made you guys keep going? Because there's a lot of couples who would just go through something like this and say, oh, I'm done. This is it. This is not what I signed up for, sort of thing. What kept you going?
This is where my gratitude for my wife is. I honestly struggle to express it because this isn't a normal expression of love. Like, my wife, Heather, she's amazing. Like, she is amazing. I don't know why. It doesn't make sense for her to stay with me. Like, if you're honest, she shouldn't have. On every natural, normal reason, I've lied through my teeth. I've destroyed her. I've been unfaithful to her. Like, what? Why? Why should you? And her response here has been something that I've watched her live for we're coming up on 24 years married, and this happened in year 2. So year 2, so for 22 years, I've watched her live this wholeheartedly. And that basic point is either the gospel is what we say it is or it isn't. Either Jesus Christ is who he says he is, and it's real, or what in the world are we all doing? And so everything that flows from that, the church's teaching, vows in a marriage, fidelity, all of that stuff, either it's real or it's not. And what she lived was, I believe it's real. And I'm not going to believe another narrative about reality other than the one that Jesus Christ presents. And honestly, I can say, Joe, I do not think I would be here if it wasn't for her. There's no question. She was the catalyst to all of this for me. I actually have thought about it numerous times. I'm scared. It's a scary thought for me to think about where I would be if it wasn't for her. I'd probably be divorced 5 times. I don't even know. It's a scary thought. I definitely wouldn't be doing any of this kind of stuff. Heather she was a massive, massive gift and grace in my life. Like, just take this on. Day 2, I think it was day 2 or day 3 after I've confessed everything. I'm sleeping in a different room, and she's not yelling at me. She's not like mad. She's deeply hurt, and she's not hiding it. And day 2, day 3, she says to me, I want you to know that I forgive you. And here's the crazy part. I don't even remember that because I was so consumed with my inner world and my pain. That's part of the dynamic, is you're obsessed with yourself. That's part of the issue. I was so consumed with it, I don't even remember her saying it. And we've had to retell the story. And I vaguely have this memory of it because I remember internally, I'm like, that's impossible, right? Like, you look back on it and go, that's not possible. People don't do that. This isn't real, but it is, but it's the gospel, right? It feels impossible. I was the guy caught in adultery, and Heather was the one who's saying, I forgive you, but don't sin anymore. And she offered both of those to me. She said to me, she doesn't remember saying this to me, but I have this vivid memory of her saying it. Maybe it was the Holy Spirit that put these words in my heart, but I felt like they came directly from her. And they were, I expect you to be a man and nothing less. That's my expectation of you. I forgive you, but it's time for you to be a man. And what I say when I share this story with people, I'm a movie guy. And like I said, I'm inspired. I like competition. That's the scene for me when the Rocky music turned on in the background. And it lit a fire under me because I felt like I had a second chance at life. And somebody said to me, not, you're the biggest loser I've ever seen. What the hell's wrong with you? I mean, all the things she could have said. She could have rubbed my face so deep and all of that. And what she said to me is the thing I wanted to be the whole time to begin with. That's what I deeply desired, was to be a real, authentic, strong, and good man. And she basically said, put up or shut up. Time to get in the arena. And that like exploded the fire within me. And now it wasn't easy. Every time you see the montage in a movie where it's like they go through 8 months or a year or 5 years of something in 30 seconds, we all go, yeah. But the friggin' 5 years is hard, and the music stops and it sucks and you don't want to do it anymore and all of that. But those moments were utter gifts to me, and all of them were from Heather because she trusted and believed the gospel.
Wow. So beautiful. And thanks again for sharing so vulnerably. I want to backtrack a little bit because you said something that was really profound about shame and about how, I think there is this scale of intensity when it comes to various addictions or, unwanted behavior. Like I agree with you on that. And I think part of the reason that makes the sexual struggles so shameful is that as a culture, I think we look down on them, at least, within like the Christian culture. And so I think, it can drive you so deep within yourself that you think, man, if I ever were to show anyone this, they would quickly and easily disown me. And they would, say all the things that run in the back of your head, that I'm a failure, I'm never going to get over this and so on. And I've heard people say too that when you're in the midst of that, not just believing that what you're doing is wrong, but you are wrong, you are bad, kind of being the definition of shame, this dual identity emerges where to the outside world and to, like you said, at work and church, like you were this one person, and then interiorly you were just this broken, struggling person. And then the gap between those two gets so big, it can feel like they can't be reconciled. Like, and that's such a hopeless place to be, like you articulated so well. I'm curious if, backtracking a little bit when it came to what held you back? Was it the shame that held you back from telling Heather in the first place? Because I imagine there were times when you were going through this, where like, man, I want to open up. I need to open up. Like, what was it that held you back and held you to that line of lying and deceiving?
It took me getting into my own story and almost understanding myself before I could really appreciate the why. And I'd say one of the biggest reasons of why I didn't share with Heather is because I was terrified of experiences that happened earlier in my life happening again. So as a very young boy, I was abandoned very early by my mom. Not her fault. She had mental illness and she had extreme postpartum depression, and she had to go into inpatient mental health care. So she was gone for months when I was a brand new baby. And that was an incredibly deep wound of abandonment. And then from that, the enemy just thought, hey, let's just beat the tar out of this guy with this wound of abandonment. So every girlfriend I had, they always broke up with me. I never broke up with them. So there's always this repeating narrative of the thing you long for the most, feminine care, will always leave you. And it was to the depth of my being. So the thought of sharing with somebody something that in my mind guaranteed my biggest fear to happen, I'm like, I can't do that. So I'm in this terrible, I call it a double bind. If I go left, I'm dead. But if I go right, I'm dead. I don't know what to do. So if I share with Heather all this, she will abandon me. But if I don't share all of this with Heather, I'm living a complete and utter lie that once she finds out, she'll abandon me. So I'm just stuck in both places terribly. That was probably the biggest reason, but I didn't know that that was the biggest reason until after the fact. I think another reason, if I'm just honest, the wounds that those dynamics, the impact of those wounds in me made me very, very selfish and self-reliant. I call it a masturbatory mentality. And this is the language I've learned. People say, oh, I've struggled with masturbation. Yep. I think the bigger issue is that we have a masturbatory mentality, outlook, way of life. Everything becomes masturbatory. It's all about me, what I can get, and my pleasure. And so I think that dynamic goes on. It's rampant, and it was rampant in my life. Selflessness was a very small category for me. It was all about me because I believed I had to make it about me for me to be okay, because no one else would take care of me or be there. Those are all the lies and vows and beliefs. And so, I mean, it's a bit crude, but I was quote unquote masturbating all the time because everything was about my pleasure and everybody else's job was to make sure I was okay. So that was another reason. So I would look at Heather and justify at times my behavior because she wasn't giving me what I wanted. And I was convinced this is what I need. And if everybody would just give me that, The lie becomes, if I could just have pornography in real life, I'd be fine. And I believed that lie deeply. And so in my relationship with Heather, you bring that into the marriage. That's one of the issues with pornography. And then you end up deeply wounding your spouse because you're expressing disappointment in them because they're not living the lie with you. Just as a footnote, I think that's a very dangerous thing that happens for a lot of couples, is their spouses that believe that's the remedy, give them what they want, and then they begin to compromise their own dignity, and that just creates all kinds of more interesting and troublesome dynamics. So selfishness is kind of what I'm saying here. Massive selfishness and a terrible fear of abandonment. And then I would say the last one was, I honestly didn't have the kind of relationship with God to where I sincerely trusted he would actually satisfy me. And so I'm living this life with God and going, yeah, God's good. And, I say all the right stuff. I'm passing all the multiple choice tests. But if I'm honest, will God actually satisfy me to this depth? No, I don't think he goes there. I mean, you look at all the stuff that we're formed in and all the false formation and prudishness that enters into our world, and we call it holiness, we call it prudence, but it's actually Manichaeism, which means body bad, spirit good. We adopt some of these heresies without even realizing it, and then we shut out the very grace of God in our lives. And so I believed God can't satisfy me. So you throw that combo together, that was gnarly. I was like, man, I'm not going there.
Wow. No, it's so profound. And I love how you tied lust and pride together. I don't think a lot of people make that connection, but I think it's so potent. I heard that St. Augustine once wrote that lust is the sin of the proud. And I think, like you said so well, it's so true, because at the core of lust, of using another person for our own pleasure, is, obviously an extreme amount of selfishness, which is pride. And so I think one of the antidotes, which I know we're going to get to in a second here, is an incredible amount of humility. And obviously valuing like the worth, the dignity, the value, of another person, seeing their pain, seeing, their desire to be loved, and just understanding how our behavior of selfishness just destroys them in so many ways. And so I love how you guys were able to kind of go from that place into just a much healthier, more beautiful place. And so many things you had, I would love to comment on, but I know we don't have forever today. I could talk to you forever, but I'm curious if there's anything else that you would say that sexual compulsion addiction was filling, like if there are any other needs, because you outlined it so well, how it went back to the abandonment wound, but I'm just curious if there's anything else you would say, like this need or this thing was filling this need.
Yeah, I would say I'm like, like when you talk about the 5 love languages and those kind of things, physical touch is very high for me. So I'm a sensual person, and I'm stereotypically male, where I'm highly visual, I'm very sensual. And so what the pornography was doing was just almost like meeting me to a depth that I felt. And so in some ways it was this perfect assault on me, because it's deeply visual, highly erotic, all of these things that I kind of at baseline feel. And I think I don't think everybody's that way, or if they are, I don't know that. And so pornography had like this perfect concoction for me, and passion. Like, I'm a passionate guy. I'm a pretty intense guy. When I play a sport, like I go all in. I'm like an all in kind of person. And so what you see, one of the twists of pornography is that it meets you in that space. And the lie that it suggests is you won't find this elsewhere. In other words, when you hear and look at the passion of Jesus Christ, you don't equate that to a satisfaction of eros. Most people don't link those. They go, that's the opposite of eros. And I think one of the dilemmas that we have is that we assume making a gift of ourself, which is the passion of Christ, the cross, doesn't satisfy. This to me is one of the crux issues with Christianity and the gospel and Jesus's message, is we don't believe him when we say, when you lose your life, you'll find it. I think that's a line in the sand that few people actually cross over to believe. And so we think we actually have to take care of ourselves. And so they go, where am I going to go? I want it to be really good, highly intent, blah, blah, blah. And this is the brutal thing of pornography. It's affordable. They call it the 3 A's. It's affordable, meaning I don't have to pay much to get it. It's anonymous. No one's going to watch me, and it's easily accessible. Affordable, anonymous, and accessible. That is a real tough one. And this is one of the issues with the advent of modern technology is, back in the 70s or 80s, early 90s, to partake of pornography took more guts than it does now. And so you had to have a bigger desire. So it had a threshold that a lot of people just wouldn't push through. And in some ways it prevented a lot of issues. But affordable, accessible, anonymous, man, that is rampant right now. So anyway, I feel like I'm digressing a bit.
No, it's so good and so relevant to what we're talking about, because you're right. It comes at you so aggressively. And I think not only men, but also women now are struggling in so many different ways when it comes to just lacking self-mastery in the realm of sexuality. But also, I think, like you said so well earlier on, there's something about our sexuality that just hits on so many components of the human person. And so we're all, I think so many people have been through trauma. They carry brokenness with them through life, especially our audience who's coming from, really broken, dysfunctional families, that the kind of sexual release is just so attractive because it feels in the moment that it kind of satisfies those needs. It satisfies that brokenness for a moment. At least you feel some level of relief and maybe even wholeness. I don't know if I'd use that word exactly, but
I know what you mean. When you have, I'm trying to be veiled with my language. When you have a full experience of a sexual act, what literally goes on neurologically for you is a very intense bonding cycle. And so what it's created to do is one of the most powerful things on the face of the planet. It's to take two people and to have this repeated experience where they keep bonding and keep bonding and keep bonding and get closer and deeper and closer and closer and closer, because the Lord's saying, I want to show you what I want us to look like, meaning God and the person. I want to give you a sign of what that looks like and how deeply bonded I want to be with you. Well, it's like this is the joke, like when God's pouring the chemicals together to make reality, that he slipped and he poured too long in this domain. And we're like, whoa, why'd you put so much of that one in this one? And we go back off a bit. And so we feel like we got to counteract God's design, but that's just not true. He got it right the first time. And what he's desiring is that level of intense bonding, intimacy with us. This is in all these domains is exactly what heaven is. It's the fulfillment of all the desires that we have. They're put back into right order. And I think that's where people just go, no way. Heaven's full of angels and organ music and ice cream. We put all these random categories together and go, such a trite definition of it. And so C.S. Lewis has this concept of there's no desire that God can't satisfy. I think what people struggle with is they go, well, I have desires he won't satisfy my way. Okay, yes. That is the issue. But a desire that's unsatisfiable, no. That's hard to believe. Oh, just pick up your cross, that's going to make me happy? Baloney. I'd rather go do this other thing. And this is where the cross is not easy. This is where G.K. Chesterton says things like Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried. It is not for the faint of heart, this call to be a disciple of Jesus. But what you see over and over and over and over with the people who took it serious, we call those people saints, they were deeply satisfied. I would call them the happiest people that have ever lived. Now you might look at them at face value and go, they look sad. Look at the artwork that shows them. And I'm going, you might not realize all the depth that's going on, right? Don't judge a book by its cover. I had somebody recently say, Jake, why don't you smile bigger? And I was like, I thought I was smiling. I'm actually happy when I'm making this face, So there's a bit of that maybe going on, but.
Wow. No, profound and so good. And I think this gets to the root of so many struggles in our relationship with God, where I think Father Michael Gately said that I think the core problem is that we don't actually trust God because we don't believe he's good. And we think that he's holding out on us. We think that he's putting us through these ridiculous rules and regulations and just trying to stifle us so that we don't experience the joy and the pleasure that we could experience on our own. And so, like you articulated so well, and I've experienced this in my life too, we just think, well, I really don't believe that God's going to take care of me, come through for me, satisfy me. So I'm just going to take care of it myself. And that, can look like any number of unhealthy behavior, but I think that's where the world is right now. And it's so sad. And you're right. When you go through the cross, and you go through just living life as it was meant to be lived, even though it's not pain-free, it's not easy, there's like a deeper level of satisfaction, of meaning, of joy that you receive that it's hard to articulate unless you go through it.
Yes. I am eternally grateful to John Paul II and Christopher West, because the whole anthropology of the theology of the body, particularly how do I manage desire, was them. Like all of that has been formation from them being able to situate the deepest longings of my heart within a context where satisfaction is real and it's also holy. So for example, the concept of freedom. For me, freedom meant do what I want, when I want, how I want it, so I get the biggest bang for my buck, the biggest return. And then another concept of freedom was offered to me, which was freedom is not living in jail. It's not, because you can do all the things you want within a jail, but you're still in a jail. You're still locked up. You're not actually free. You don't have the capacity to have your yes be yes and your no be no. Something else is pulling you around like a puppet. But you have to be brutally honest to admit, man, I can't actually do and say what I want here. I'm in bondage. So getting the permission to do whatever I want is different than the capacity. Do I even have the capacity to love somebody? Do I even have the capacity to say no? So that spin for me was huge. And then to say, what if you can be free and be satisfied? I was like, that's impossible, right? And it's just so subtle that these narratives get in there. And basically what they taught me was, now you're looking Jesus Christ right in his face. And he's saying to you, I can. Will you follow me? Because I promise you I can. And that is a shattering, rattling reality. An author put it this way that I love. When you encounter Jesus as he truly is, you will either turn away from him because you can't handle what he's offering, or you will shamelessly worship him. And that, I love that articulation because it captures my experience. And I think the honest experience people have when they encounter Jesus as he actually is, with all the garbage drapery that we put around him. Like when you peel all that stuff away and you look Jesus Christ square in the eyes, his offer is life. And he even says it to the full. Life to the full is what I'm offering to you.
Wow. And I love the point you made about freedom, because I think people feel that strongly today. Like they want freedom, right? They don't want to be tied down. They don't want to be, so to speak, they don't want, shackles. But like you said, so often we're slaves to certain behaviors or whatever attachments that we have in our life that we don't even realize. We just think that, no, I choose this thing, but if we ever tried to stop it, it would be like, no, I couldn't really do it. And I love that definition you gave. And the way I've kind of thought about it too in the past is the greatest measure of freedom, in my opinion, is, like you said, your capacity to love. The greater your capacity to love, the more free you are. The less your capacity to love, the less free you are. And I think a lot of even moral issues can be looked at through that lens. And so that shifted things for me, especially when I was younger and struggling with, lust and pornography and masturbation, all that stuff. It was, realizing that it was holding me down. And it's almost like you can't, I know Christopher West uses the analogy of like eating junk food from a dumpster. It's like you can't really imagine what an amazing ribeye would taste like when you're in the midst of that. But once you taste it, you're like, my goodness, like this is like a world of a difference that I never even knew, because I never experienced it. But once you do, you're like, wow, there's something else on the other side. And I think that's what I want people to hear from your whole story. Like there's something better on the other side that maybe you can't imagine or experience or, yeah.
There's something burning within me that I want to say to people, because I almost want to remind my former self of this. So you take me back 30 years and you're looking at a teenage version of me walking up to a beautiful woman and having the integrity of heart to simply love her and not grasp after her felt impossible. But I can do that now. And the satisfaction that comes from walking up to a beautiful woman and not having this thing within me that's trying to fantasize or what if, or if I played my cards right, all that stuff that's twisted and distorted within you. And to be able to say it in freedom and to make that a gift to them, and they feel and see that you have no ulterior motive, Watch what that does. It is amazing. I have, what I love about that is that when you start to taste and see what love is like, and to be a lover in all of the right contexts and ways, as a husband, as a father, as a brother, to be able to, with utter congruence, to walk up to somebody and bless them and not need anything from them. The life that goes into that person is like stuff you've never seen before. And what that takes is an integrity of heart. Like that's not easily won. You don't cheaply go up there. This is one of the things I love about the feminine soul. Their BS meter is so sensitive. It is such a gift, and it's terrifying all at the same time. And so they can smell your macho BS from so far away. And so what that demands is an utterly clear-minded, solid man. And when you can offer that to them, the life that comes into them is like nothing you've ever seen on any false version of pornography. And it's live. And you get to do that all the time. Like, I'm not recommending going up to everybody and go, hey, you're beautiful. Hey, you're beautiful. Because now that starts to get distorted and probably be about you. But imagine your heart is so conformed unto Christ that you are literally moved by what moves his heart. And so you go up to people and you want to love them. And you become a lover. In the right context, an untwisted version of being a lover of people. It is the most satisfying thing in the world, dude. It is unbelievably wonderful for men to love men and women well. Like, it's the best. It really is the best. And then to have that capacity to love in a unique and particular relationship where those words can become flesh and you mean it into your bones. And to make that gift of someone to someone, and for them to receive that gift from you, and to have it all be true and good and beautiful and passionate, there's nothing like that. And wow. So we settle, C.S. Lewis says it this way, we settle for playing in dirty mud puddles when we're made for the holiday at the sea. And what I'm trying to emphasize is I have gone on the holidays. I've tasted the holidays that C.S. Lewis references. They're amazing. Like, they are worth it. They're incredibly satisfying, and they're not cheap. They require a total and complete yes of the person who wants to realize that reality. But that's what makes them matter. Like the stuff that we get these days, because it's cheap, like cheap love, cheap respect, cheap praise, it's so shallow. And then you wonder why people are depressed and have no meaning. It's because everything's lost its value. But when you raise a standard and you hold that standard, the thing has value again. Like, this is one of the things that, like with athletics, I like athletics. When they start changing all the rules and all the old people who played the sport are like, you can't do this. Like, come on. Yeah. Like, you don't get to change the thing, because that compromises the whole point of it all. You show up and you either won or you lost. You're either better than them or you're not. And there's no other way to prove it other than getting on the mat and showing you. It is instant reality right in front of you. And if you want to get better, it takes a lot of dedication and hard work. It is what it is. You're either going to embrace it or not. There's no games. I love that. It's not cheap.
So good. So good. And I think we need to hear about that more. So I'm so glad we spent so much time here, because I think people, when they're stuck in an addiction or compulsion, they lack the motivation, and they don't think what's waiting on the other side is worth it. It's like, no, I'm more comfortable here. And I remember Jay Stringer in his book, he has like this awesome quote about how you have this kind of maddening fight with freedom in the midst of an addiction or compulsion. And I think this gets to the heart of it, because we actually don't think that what's waiting on the other side is better. We think what we're in the midst of is so much better. And so feel free to comment on that. But I wanted to shift gears a little bit in the time we have left to kind of fill the gap. We've kind of contrasted what your life was like then to what it's like now, which is just beautiful. Feel free to add anything there. But I'm curious what happened in between, if there's any particular steps or principles or lessons that you would like to pass on to everyone listening, especially people who maybe find themselves where you were years ago.
There's numerous things that were very important. Over the years, I've tried to categorize them. And what's difficult about just labeling with, here's the 5 easy steps to pornography recovery. Like, it's never that's cheap. And so I don't mean to cheapen it. Like, these are very real and there's a lot of depth to them. But I mentioned one before, and that would be the sacraments, in particular confession. Confession changes lives. It's a real encounter with supernatural capacity, in particular in the areas of healing and forgiveness and the grace to be able to not sin again. You can't find that anywhere else. You might not be able to see it, but there are lots of things we can't see that are very, very real. So I would say sacraments are very high on the list, and use them a lot. Go a lot to them. You know, confession, I'm not encouraging scrupulosity, but I'm saying if you're in an addiction, go to confession every week. Go to confession every 3 days. Like, what I love about my region is I can find confession like anywhere the next day, right? So just yesterday, I was like, I'm going to timestamp this, but we're recording this right after the Feast of St. Joseph. And so big feast day for me. And I was like, you know what? I just want to go to confession. And I could. So I'm really grateful for all of the priests out there who offer that, because it's a huge thing. So sacraments. I would say another one that was very big for me that you mentioned as well, which is other people. You cannot get through this alone. And there's different kind of types of people that you need. I needed a Christopher West who was like the trainer at the gym, who's got the right dose of, come on, you can do this, as well as helping me analyze my, what I'm doing and not doing. But I also had a lot of people who were exceptionally kind. The guy who I mentioned, who I shared my story with at work and the annulment thing, the first thing he said to me was, Jake, hold your head high. And I was like, what? Did you just hear what I just said? And he said, he was fighting for me right in that moment. The brilliance of that man to begin battling shame on my behalf, like in his third statement, it was utterly brilliant. Hold your head high. You are now fighting a good fight. Like, oh, that phrase just rang in my ears. So I needed other people. I needed to go to counseling. I needed healing. And so I went to many versions of counseling, and basically I've never stopped. I've been in counseling ever since that whole journey started with me. I've never stopped because I have perpetual areas that I need to address. This area isn't there anymore, but that doesn't mean there aren't other areas that I need to address. So I went into healing, lots of it. And I just said, this is my path, and I'm not getting off of it, because this is what it means to be a Christian. This is the gospel message, perpetual healing. My prayer life I had to take very seriously. And I made things practical. I made a bet with a buddy, because money was precious when you're young and you're early married and you got a new family. So I made a bet with a friend. If one of us misses, we committed to an hour, a holy hour, you have to pay the other guy $100. And that stung. And so it was like, I'm not missing. And you know what? Heather was like, you're not missing. Get your butt up and pray, because we don't have $100 to spare. And I was like,
it's not in the budget.
It's not in the budget. You being lazy is not on the budget. So I needed that. Another one was fasting. Fasting was very important to me. I had to strengthen my will muscle. That's, again, Christopher West's brilliance. He said, Jake, you go to the gym for your body, but you're not going to the gym for your soul. And part of the going to the gym for your soul is fasting. And so I committed to a bread and water fast on every Friday. And it was hard. I did not like it. And it wasn't brutal. Like, I'd go to Panera Bread and I'd get the nicest stinking bread that I could find, because I was like, I don't know. And I even eventually got to the point where butter counted. So I don't know if that was cheating, but the point was I was strengthening a muscle, which was my will muscle. And I would say the last thing was just truth. I needed to fill myself with a ton of truth, not just truth like, oh, the church teaches. Yes, that, but also this is the truth about my identity. This is the truth about why I do what I do. This is the truth about God. And I had to fight for those truths to actually like find root within my soul, for the soil to be turned over, to be able anything to have root, because like my life at that point was like a hurricane, and you're trying to plant a garden in a hurricane. Like, you got to really protect some of those things for them to actually grow and get strong enough. So that's kind of the rough categories that I would say.
No, it's super helpful. And I love that you highlighted the point, like, as helpful as all those principles are and those tactics, that healing is deeply personal, that it might look a little bit different in different people's life. But I think so many of those components, I know in my story, were present when I've experienced the most amount of healing. And so especially I would just double down on that whole vulnerability point of like having someone in your life who just knows everything about you, who you can just share everything about you, and who they're just going to love you in spite of it all. It's beyond healing. It's beyond helpful. It's something that can transform you.
Yeah, maybe I can nuance that for a little bit. There are two types of people that I find helpful, and both are needed, and that was represented by Christopher and Tom. Tom was the guy who said, "Hold your head high." And so as I've seen that over the years and becoming somebody who's worked with people in these regards, I've found that both kinds of people are necessary. So the kind that I will love you no matter what, and I will love you in the midst of the sin and the ugliness, etc. And Christopher did that for me. He also was a wonderful version of accountability because he wasn't okay with excuses. And so I think a lot of the problem is that people have an accountability partner, and what they give each other permission to do is to just get away with whatever. And so I challenged a group of men I was working with one time, and this is one of the best stories I've ever heard. I challenged a group of men one time to actually do real accountability with each other. And so there was a group of men, and they came in, and one guy kept coming and saying he's falling. And another guy in the group said, I promised you I would help you. And if you come back next week and you say you've fallen again, I will take care of this problem for you. And the guy was like, what? So we're all like, whoa, what does this mean? So the guy comes back the following week. He says, I fell again. And the guy who promised him said, I'll take care of it. So I'm like, what is going on? So now it's the next week, and there is all kinds of issues between these two guys. Well, here's what the guy did. He knew that the way that this guy fell was through the internet and through buying things on TV. He went over to his house and he ripped the cable box off of his house and cut all the cable wires. Ripped it off, like holding the head of Medusa in his hands, and left it on his porch and drove away. So he had no access to the internet. He couldn't get any access to anything. I think that's illegal, what he did. But the commitment was so amazing. They were the one guy who had his house assaulted was not happy because then he had to pay the company to come back out and fix it and blah, blah, blah. But I went, that's the kind of thing. I'm not promoting illegal behavior, but that's the kind of thing that the guy was serious. He was like, either I'm loving you or I'm not. Like, so I love that story. And
no,
I don't know,
so good.
Maybe that guy's in jail for doing that for other people. I don't know.
No, it's so good. And I think it hits on that whole thing. When we're trying to help someone, we need to go in with both truth and love. We can't just love them and, say, well, what you do doesn't matter. No, it does. We need to hit them with the truth and say, no, you're called to more than this, and you can beat this. And I'm going to be standing right there through it with you, but I'm not going to let you fall prey to mediocrity and just like living this life that's never going to end, because it's just depressing. So much good stuff there. I want to just fire a few questions at you. When it comes to someone listening right now who is in that spot that you were in, maybe in their marriage or leading up to marriage, in a dating relationship even. I know those are two different things. So maybe let's just focus on marriage for the sake of this. So what would you say to that person? Like, where do they go first? And I'm curious, do you always advise sharing your struggle with the spouse?
Yeah, good questions. I'll be brief. The first things I would say is you're not going to go anywhere if you're not honest. And so step one is getting honest with the reality of the situation. Christopher did the same thing to me. And he said, you've got to be honest about, do you actually want this? Because he said, you can actually want it, and that looks a particular way. Or you can want to want it. Or you can like the idea of wanting it. That's not wanting freedom. And you just need to be honest about where you're at. Do I want it? Do I want to want it? Or do I hope to one day want to want it? You've got to situate yourself there, because there you're at least honest. You have to be honest at first. Then I would say the next step is, what do you believe will happen with regard to a journey of transformation? And you need to look for the lies there. So for example, it's impossible. I said that all the time. Obviously, I'm sitting here proving that wrong, but I believed it. So I believed a lie. So I have to look at what I believe about a process of change and actually examine it and examine that for lies. And usually you need to do that with someone else. Amongst all the other stuff, I would say the last one is something I've learned from the Navy SEALs. And I think the reason I say that is because Navy SEALs are people who do extremely difficult things. And you can learn a lot from them. There's a friend of mine who's a Navy SEAL. He's a retired Navy SEAL. And I've talked to him about all these things. And he said getting free of pornography addiction is an equivalent to going through Hell Week. So if you know anything about the Navy SEALs, he said, and he's been through Hell Week. He's been through Hell Week. So he has real life experience. And he said, I respect any man who has worked through an addiction, man or woman, but we're talking about men, worked through an addiction to pornography. He said, you are like us when you've done this. Oh, that was huge motivation for me. But one of the things that they teach there is what's called micro goals. The principle is you will never make it through Hell Week when you think about the entire week at the same time. You'll quit because it's overwhelming. So what you have to do is draw your attention, which isn't easy, but it is possible. Draw your attention back until the next thing you're focusing on is reasonable and achievable. And that might be all I have to focus on is the next 30 minutes. And if that's the sobriety journey that you're in, is all my goal right now is the next 30 minutes. And I'm working hard, because it's not instantly happening. I'm working hard to hold my attention to being holy, being pure for the next 30 minutes. I'm breaking down this lifelong journey into a goal that's reasonable and achievable. It's micro goals. That's how they survive extremely difficult things like Hell Week. And they train that and they practice that and then they embody it. I think that's essential to recovery, is micro goals. You have to break this whole thing down into realistic parts. And that doesn't magically happen. That is intentional. As soon as you think about, I'm going to have to go 7 years without ever struggling, you're done. It's too big. You're done. It'll crush you. You got to think about the next 10 minutes, day, week, whatever is manageable to you.
So good. And proof that works is the lone survivor story of Marcus Luttrell. He was a Navy SEAL who, you guys might know this story. He was essentially just left without a team in the mountains in Afghanistan. And he actually, using that exact tactic that Jake just taught, he actually crawled on his belly with like a broken femur. His nose was collapsed into his face. Sorry, this is kind of graphic. He had bitten through his tongue. He was on his belly, like running from likely hundreds of enemy fighters. He would take a stick and draw a line in the sand in front of him. And he said, if I can just get past that line, I'm going to live. And he did that again. He did that for 7 miles.
Oh, I love that.
7 miles. And so it works. It works. And so good. And I think one of the biggest lies I just want to touch on briefly when it comes to breaking free from sexual compulsion addiction is that I'm going to beat it myself. I'll figure out a way to beat yourself. That's a complete lie. And I know we can do a whole nother show on that. But the final thing I just wanted to make sure we touched on was just your ministry. You have so much more to offer here. I mean, this episode is a proof of it. So please tell us about it. What do you guys offer and how can people find you online?
Yeah, I'd say that the simplest thing is to go to our website, liferestoration.ca. CA is for Canada. We're in Canada. So Life Restoration Ministries is what we do. And in that, we do all kinds of various things. The biggest thing that we offer is we want people to encounter Jesus, and we want people to experience the maturation and healing of their humanity. So human formation, healing, encounter with Jesus, that's what we're all about. So if you're kind of looking at going, what's the nuance here? Human formation is a big nuance. Encounter with Jesus is a big nuance. But we do that through conferences, podcasts. Like we have a podcast, and Joe, you've been on ours, which was a great gift to us. So Heather has a podcast. My wife, she and I run it together, Abiding Together. I have a podcast called Restore the Glory. Heather and I are actually going to be starting our own podcast together. It's one of our ministries, and podcasts are a thing we love to do. So that will be one. We do conferences and talks and formation courses, et cetera. But if you go to the website, you get a sense of all of that. And Joey, I'm sorry, I know I'm way over time, but you had asked a question about, do you say to your spouse or do you not? And I think I'll answer that very, very simply. I wish there was an easy black or white answer. I don't think there is one, but here is one thing I will say. In my experience, I don't know anyone, and I'm sure they exist, but I don't know anyone who hasn't told their spouse and gotten through it. I say that as a field note from my experience. Now, hundreds of people could write in and say, hey, great. I just don't know about them. I have a lot of stories of people who've broken free when their spouse was on the journey with them and their spouse was aware. That's my story. So That's one comment I would make. But back to the other thing, life restoration podcast, retreats, etc. Go to that website.
Love that. And one piece of advice on that for everyone listening, I've heard that when you do tell your spouse, you want to make sure there's someone else present there who is have some level of competence in this, because then your spouse has somewhere to go to talk about these things and not just between the two of you. So I've heard that's a really, really helpful tactic.
Yeah, we don't want to be flippant. It's not about you. That's the thing.
Yeah.
We could do a whole other episode just about that, but there's a lot of differing opinions there, but
sure.
Love them. The point is to love them. It's not to get you out of the doghouse or to get you better. Remember, it's not about you. The point is what do they need? How can I love them well? So.
Okay. No, so good. And Jake, thank you so much for coming on the show. I could talk with you forever and just such good content, good advice. I want to give you the last word. Like, what's one final piece of encouragement that you would give to everyone listening, especially someone who finds himself where you were years ago?
Trust Jesus. It sounds cliche, but when you are with him, when you're facing his direction, even if it feels like you're so far away, you don't lose. You never lose. When you are close to Jesus, facing him, trust him, it's worth it.
So good. Jake is amazing. And it's really an understatement to say that if you want to really soak in all the wisdom that he has to offer, re-listening to that episode is a smart move. But I wanted to highlight the 6 tips that he gave to break free from sexual compulsion or addiction. One is sacraments, like confession he mentioned. 2, people, someone to coach you and really hold you accountable through this whole process of breaking free. 3, therapy, to heal the brokenness that drives that behavior. 4 is prayer, to tap into strength that's beyond your own. 5 is fasting, to grow your self-control, your self-mastery muscle. And 6 is truth, to bury those lies that keep you stuck. And if you want more content like this, I highly recommend checking out Jake's website and the podcasts that he hosts. But I'd also humbly recommend our podcast series called Healing Sexual Brokenness. It's a 6-part series where we just offer a lot of tactics and resources from experts on how to overcome unwanted sexual behavior so you can find freedom. And it's so relevant for people like us who come from divorce and broken families, because one expert found that 90% of people who struggle with a sexual addiction actually come from a broken family. Pretty mind-blowing. And so if you want to listen to that, there's 2 ways you can do that. In your podcast app, you can just, once you've selected our show, you can just search Healing Sexual Brokenness and you'll see all of those episodes. Or you can just click on the link in the show notes of this episode, which will take you to restoredministry.com/sexual brokenness. Again, restoredministry.com/sexual brokenness, or just click on the link in the show notes. That wraps up this episode. If you know someone who's struggling from their parents' divorce or broken marriage, feel free to share this podcast with them. Honestly, if you take like 20 seconds out and message them, I promise you they will be so grateful. And in closing, always remember, you are not alone. We're here to help you feel whole again and break the cycle of dysfunction and divorce in your own life. And keep in mind the words of C.S. Lewis, who said, "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending."